Kind to come here and present to us today about our safe sanctuary policy. She's not really going to talk about our policy, we'll help with that, but she's going to talk about what we need to do should a child disclose information they've been abused or neglected or something along that line. So we're going to let her talk about that. And she's from the Kenosha-Racine Child Advocacy Center. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Are we ready to go? All right, wonderful. I was forewarned that this was going to be video recorded as well. So thank you. Again, my name is Nila Grahl. I am the manager of the Kenosha County Child Advocacy Center, which is part of Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. I've been in that role for almost 5 years, but I've been in the field working on issues related to abuse and child maltreatment for almost 20 years. So I say, first of all, that your congregation should be commended. This is really, really a wonderful, important thing that you all are doing as far as implementing a safe sanctuary policy. I come to you also as a volunteer from a congregation that has a safe sanctuary policy, as a Sunday school teacher and those types of things. So I understand sometimes what that trepidation can be, and this really is an opportunity just for people to feel empowered. I want this to be really casual, so please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. So with that, why do we put safe sanctuary policies in place to start with? So first of all, I did get an opportunity to take a look at the safe sanctuary policy. Are there people here who were involved in the writing or reviewing of it? Okay, wonderful, very good. So I'm hoping that you all will be able to give some input as well into some of those aspects of your particular policy. But in this day and age, we want to really be sure that children feel safe and supported in any space that they're in. We're hearing a lot more about things related to child abuse and neglect and disclosures. We want parents to feel assured when they're dropping their children off or when they're part of a Sunday school class or coming to any type of activity that is something that's important. And we want you to feel supported as well as volunteers. Does everybody have a copy of the handout and your guidelines? Okay. Do we have any more copies available?
We can make copies.
Okay. Otherwise, here, I'll give you. Thank you. Sure, absolutely. So let's talk about the issue just a little bit in general. I think it's important just that people are sort of aware of the aspect of abuse and what it looks like. So the last numbers that we have available, this is specifically for Kenosha County, in 2017, 1,173 CPS reports came in. These were concerned people who were potentially mandated reporters or otherwise, who felt there was a concern right here in Kenosha County. 708 of those rose to the level of wanting some type of an initial response or some type of an investigation to take place. Last year, the Kenosha Child Advocacy Center, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, which is the organization that I work for and oversee, saw 406 children from Kenosha County come through our doors. So when you see those headlines of a sexual abuse incident or charges that have been brought forward, more often than not, the likelihood is that that child has come to the Child Advocacy Center. And again, we'll talk about what that process looks like and how you can all feel empowered to know that kids are in good hands when that takes place. The statistics that are out there, and you'll see that I do have a citation, 1 out of 5 girls and 1 out of 20 boys will be sexually abused before the age of 18. I actually think there's a lot of statistics out there that show that the numbers are much more significant than that, especially with boys. There's actually an organization, you can go to the website, 1in6.org, where some of the concern is that that might be the number that is actually out there. So again, this is something that is prevalent and something that we want to be sure that we're paying attention to. So considerations for churches and for your congregation specifically. Again, we'll talk about some of these things briefly, and if anybody who's been involved in the drafting of your policies want to interject, please feel free to do so. But trust but verify. Screening of your volunteers. This is incredibly, incredibly important. We'll talk about it a little bit more. But we know that people come with the understanding that you are part of a community and you want to be involved. But we want to verify that information. One of the things we'll talk about and I'm really glad to see that it's in your policy as well, is that there's active participation. So do you want people to come into the church or into your community and organization who've been here for just a few weeks and are indicating that they want to volunteer? That active participation, I think, is something that can be really important and valuable. We know, and I'm going to skip around here a little bit, who are abusers in general. How many people grew up with stranger danger, looking out for the person behind the bush? That is something that we don't necessarily teach anymore. That is not the reality of how sexual abuse occurs. This is something that occurs with people that children know. It's this grooming process, and churches are one place. The reality is where kids can be acceptable or accessible. So we want to be able to provide that safety net, and again, the policies that you have in place really do seem to address that. And again, you all are first responders. So I want you to come away today with a little bit of that empowerment, to know that when a child may disclose to you, consider that a privilege and an honor, and what is that going to look like? So again, these are some of the main points we're going to just be sure that we address: prevention, recognition, and then that reporting process as well. So, as far as your screening procedures for ages 18 and over, does someone want to talk through just a little bit about what that process looks like as far as what you're looking for in your background check?
Well, I think primarily we're looking to make sure that, you know, there's been no violent history in the person's past. You know, no serious criminal activity in terms of drug abuse, any kinds of things that are related to children that are inappropriate, you know, that kind of thing. And we have some things specified in the policy that you can look at. Anybody else, Pastor, or anybody?
Yeah, I think we have the stipulation that if you're not a member for at least 6 months, that, you cannot work or volunteer within the children youth ministry. I think through AAL, or I guess it's Thriving now, insurance companies have done studies, and if there is a pedophile or a person seeking access to children, that if they know ahead of time that it's going to be 6 months, you won't see them again. You'll go where access is easier. So is 6 months a good time?
No, I think that's very valid. So again, I think it's important just to talk through what that looks like. If you do get information back, I think you indicate that it's a felony conviction. So I think it's important that you all have a process in place if there are concerns that do come up from a criminal background check, and that information is confidential as well.
We actually do have a process for that through the ministry program, privacy background check program.
Yeah. And I think it's important as parents that people know that that is the policy that everyone has in place, and again, just to put people at ease as far as taking that extra step to want to be a volunteer. So again, I think the other important aspect of a safe sanctuary policy is that 2-adult rule, which you all have in place as well. So thinking through, again, those circumstances where not wanting to ever put a child or a volunteer in a situation where there could be concerns or allegations. So always having 2 adults in that room. So thinking again, too, about what those backup plans are. Do you have something in place if one of your volunteers is not able to come at the last minute? Are you able to condense classes, possibly, or any of those types of things? So again, those are just things that are important to think about and are really important for a safe sanctuary policy. In addition to that, what is the makeup of your classrooms? I just put classroom windows here, which is in your policy as well, but being attentive to that as far as what is on the doors. Is it appropriate for the doors to stay open while kids are in the classroom, and those types of things? And parental consent, of course. I'm sure there's lots of activities that take place away from the church. So being sure that there's those safety nets in place, that parents are aware of who's going to be involved with transportation and what all of those things look like. So you have a pretty extensive list of situations and scenarios, which I think are all super important. In addition to that, I wanted to just take a minute because I think we could go down that road of child safety, but physical safety, I think, is something we need to be mindful of as well. So if these are things that you all do on a regular basis, you can tell me to stop, but I thought it was important just to be sure that they're mentioned. Are volunteers and everyone aware of what happens if there's a fire or tornado drill? What is actually the policy if that happens? Sunday mornings aren't necessarily going to be immune from these types of weather emergencies happening. So it's good things to be mindful of and paying attention to. Are you doing routine checks for unsafe toys, and how are your toys cleaned? We know, especially with young children who are putting things in their mouth a lot, that's an opportunity, in cold and flu season and other times of the year to make sure that those are things that are being paid attention to. And, just taking toys out of circulation. If they're starting to be worn and torn and things of that nature. Is there some type of an all about me form? And I just use that as a generic form. A lot of us fill that out at the start of the school year. But it's a good opportunity just even for that emotional safety for a child. Is there a nickname that they're used to being called? Do they have any food allergies, any sensitivities? I think even kids, loud sounds or, sometimes it takes them a while to warm up. All of those things can lend themselves and put parents at ease as well. What is your restroom policy? Does anyone want to speak to that? Because I don't want to speak to what it is, just as far as if there's a child who needs to go to the restroom and how that's handled.
Typically, what we try to do is if a child has to go to the restroom, we'll check the bathroom first, make sure there's nobody in it, allow the child to go in. We'll stay out in the hallway and observe. And, if we can have two people leaving out in the hallway, sometimes we'll do that.
Sure.
It just happened this morning with Annie and I.
Yeah.
And, so once that child, should the child need help, of course we're going to assist them. And that's why I think it's especially important to have that second person there so they can be there to witness.
Yep, absolutely. And I think along those lines, if children are, almost always it should be a situation where they're able to go in and do things on their own as far as the restroom goes. And if you look at it just from an aspect of safety, even just getting from point A to point B, just to have that person in the hallway, if there's other adults who happen to be in the restroom or not, that's what that safety net is for that child. But if there's a situation where a child would need assistance in the restroom, I don't know what that looks like for you all. But again, it's just that opportunity to think about those things now rather than when it's presenting itself and not being quite sure what to do. So great points that you all have in your policy. And then picking up after class or an activity. How does that work for your congregation or organization? Is a parent designated to come? Are children just left to go out? If there's an older sibling or something like that. Again, just something that I think is important to be mindful of. If you have some type of a gathering time, it looked like afterwards, which is wonderful. Are kids just left to go there as opposed to a parent coming to the classroom and actually
Parents pick their kids.
Yep, perfect. So, and again, this might seem, very basic, but a lot of congregations aren't necessarily thinking about this. So those are all very good points. Okay. Safe practices and boundaries. When we talk about how we engage with children, again, what we want to really do from a Child Advocacy Center standpoint and when we're talking about prevention is really that aspect of consent and empowerment. How many of us, and I'm guilty of this as well with my own children, have asked our children when they've been very young at a family gathering or event, go around the room, give everybody a hug and a kiss, say goodbye. If it's a family member, give grandma a kiss, give uncle a kiss. It wasn't even until very recently, starting to think about what that looks like. If we have the ability to start to talk to our kids about consent, that they have the power to say yes or no. Manners are very important, and I think, that's something that we shouldn't forget. But those are the opportunities we have to plant those seeds very, very early on about how we empower ourselves and what that looks like later in life. So there's some of those aspects of things that we can carry over even in a church community as well. Even among peers, when you've got young children who might end up in a pile in the middle of the floor, or you've got that one child who really likes to love on another one, just very affectionate with hugs and kisses and those types of things. There's opportunities that we have there to plant those seeds. So just those are important things to think about. I think I've heard people refer to a hula hoop rule. We're just having that, invisible hula hoop around somebody, or squares of carpet that you can put where kids are able to sit. And again, you want to have that sense of community, but there's opportunities to be able to talk about that as well. How we engage as adults, I think sometimes is really important, that we're remembering our body language and our tones of voice as well. This is a 1 hour period of time potentially in a week that can be very meaningful for a child. So we want to be mindful of that, and there's ways that we can talk to them, that we just want to be sure that we're paying attention to. Being mindful of that as adults in a child's life too, where we might think that something very simple as giving a child a hug, you never know what that emotional boundary is for a child, and so again, asking a child for permission to say, can I give you a fist bump maybe, or give you a high five instead. Again, not wanting to put anybody in a situation where there could be an allegation of anything like that. So we wanted to take this opportunity too, because I know this was something that the congregation wanted to be sure to talk about. Just some of those examples perhaps of what some appropriate ways to interact would be, or examples. So I just kind of open that up.
Yeah, okay. I know we have had, people are, concerned about hugging children, well, we can't hug the children anymore. We encourage you, like, Darcy, can you stand up for a second? So, you can't always prevent a child running up and hugging you because they want your comfort and your support. And if she was to come and run at me to give me a hug, I would let the hug occur, and I would just redirect her to kind of like a handshake with a pat on the side and redirect her. I mean, that pretty much is all you can do. Some of the other things are, encouraging by patting on the shoulder. Like she said, handshakes and the knuckle bumps. There's nothing wrong with good verbal, positive praise. And walking hand in hand with small children is okay. We aren't going to, you have to walk hand in hand with some of these little ones because it's just, we got to keep them close to us. There are times when our kids get a little rough and they like to rough and tumble, and that's just kids. But when we see that, that's one thing that we need to stop and say, you know what, guys, we gotta tone it down a little bit, and let's keep our hands off of each other, and just gentle reminders like that.
Did you lose something?
So we always want to stop any kind of roughhousing that's going on. Carol, you?
I think something else we talked about that I think we're going to try to do more so is every family has their own rules, their touch rules, and I think it's really important to make sure that we're communicating with parents and that parents are communicating with us, because I know my rules for my children were different than my neighbors, and it's really important to keep the lines of communication open.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got some handouts here too for people if anybody would like to take some, with just some reinforcement of a lot of that conversation, broken down by various age groups too. So I think that those can just be helpful tips and things to think about.
And if you ever have a question about how to interact, or or what you should do or whatnot, please come to any learning member, come to pastor. We're all here for each other to make sure that our kids are safe and you feel comfortable with the interactions.
Yeah, very good. Does anyone? Yes.
So I just want to bring up a really good point here. If you're ever have a question about somebody else's behavior, don't just, kind of shake your head and say, maybe it's not my business. Please bring it to the attention of one of the staff members.
Yes, absolutely. If you see a relationship that's developing and you're uncomfortable with it, don't leave the child alone with that person, and make sure you talk to a council member right away so we can start, taking a look at that.
But it might not even just a way of interaction. Like if it's more rough and tumble than you think should be happening, don't let that situation pass. Speak to it immediately, as opposed to saying, oh, well, it's just one time, no big deal.
I think that's a really good point. And again, it's that fine line between wanting to be supportive but also understanding how these signs begin. That grooming behavior can start very simply, and it might seem very benign in the beginning. And again, more often than not, it's going to be something that's very innocent. So, again, the idea is to empower, so people just have a concept of what that larger aspect is as far as things that are going on out there. And I think the other important thing is just to remember that children come with their own history. Some kids, those numbers that I showed you, this is all socioeconomic across every part of the county. The numbers from Children's Hospital in general with our child advocacy centers, we saw 7,000 children last year. So this touches all of us, and you never know what that history is for that child who may be coming to your program. So, yes.
We share the peace, the children share the peace with the congregation. And while we don't, we never force them to share, shake hands or anything, is that something that we should be more aware of?
I think those...
we have to go and share the peace.
Yes, those rituals are hugely important. And I think those rituals are things that can bring a child's comfort and reassurance. So I don't think you should be concerned necessarily about those things. But again, it's teaching those aspects of consent and saying yes and no from the get-go. If a child is coming up to you, giving you a hug, or the sign of peace or things like that, those are children who are feeling comfortable with it. And those are okay, and that's all healthy and appropriate. So that's a great question and a point, though. Okay, so I want to talk just a little bit about how to recognize some of the warning signs of potential concerns for abuse. And again, I don't want anybody to feel that they need to come away being a doctor or being a psychologist or anything like that, but I think in this day and age it's really important just to talk about what some of those things are that look like that maybe we've never thought of before. So starting just with physical, I need to go back one. Signs of physical abuse, and again, this is all in your policy as well, so some of this I took right from there, and it's right from the statute, so you can see that there's a definition up there. But I think it's important, again, that people just know what those suspicious signs are that it looks like. Bruising over fleshy parts of the body, not on your knees or on your elbows or places where kids are going to normally fall and have scrapes and falling off a bike and things like that. Hard to reach places. If there's shapes or patterns, or sometimes a bruise mark that might look like something, unfortunately, like a belt loop or something like that. There's a lot of presentations that are out there where there's pictures that are shown, and I didn't bring any of that along. But I just want people to be aware that those are things, that is the reality of sometimes how this manifests itself. The other thing that I think is really important that I wanted to be sure people are aware of, until I worked at Children's Hospital, this was not something, as much as I had been in the field, that I was aware of. It's called a sentinel injury, and basically this is if a child, the takeaway is if a child doesn't cruise, a child doesn't bruise. So if you have a child who is non-mobile, and there are bruises behind their ear, or on the bottom of their foot, or on their head, these are significant, important signs that something potentially is wrong with a child. There's actually been a lot of work done with our program from a research standpoint, and the reality is for children where there has been abusive head trauma or things that have happened, almost 50% of them had some of those signs leading up to it. So those are things that I think everybody can be empowered to take a look at, just be aware of. Even in our own organization, we see it from time to time. Those we consider a save. So I just like to put it out there, and again, we're not expecting anybody to be a doctor, but I just, in every walk of life we're in, I just think it's good information and important to have. So from the aspect of looking for sexual abuse, this is going to manifest itself again in many, many different ways. There's not going to be a lot of physical signs. This is going to be through potentially a disclosure. It's going to be through behavior that is changing. If there's a lot of knowledge about specific acts that might be occurring that is not age appropriate. Again, I have some handouts here, and I'm not going to go too in-depth into all of that. But again, if you are in a position where you have a child who is coming to you saying that this is something that is happening, I want everybody to walk away today feeling empowered that they would know how to respond. Because this is one of the most important things that you can do as a volunteer. If you are that safe person, consider that an honor. You are first responders just like anybody else. And this could be, as a family member. It could be in whatever other walk of life that you might be in when you walk away from the congregation as well. It's important to know that less than 5% of victims are going to have a physical abuse or signs of physical manifestation. And most medical evaluations that occur are going to be 100% normal. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens at the Child Advocacy Center and why we still encourage those to occur. But I just wanted that to be a little bit of a takeaway. Okay, reporting abuse. So what happens if you all are in a situation where you feel that you need to report? So first of all, let's talk about who is a mandated reporter and what that process looks like. So for purposes of a safe sanctuary policy, and again, this is in your policy, a mandated reporter in a church setting is a specially trained individual, including those employed as a member of the clergy, who are required to report suspected child abuse. Now, I am so glad to see you also have language in here that when we do these presentations, people other than mandated reporters have every opportunity to still call in a sign of abuse or neglect. So there's sometimes questions that come up if a teacher is off duty or it's the summer and they see something concerning to a child. Should they call or should they not call? And I guess my takeaway is, why wouldn't we? Is this really the opportunity for all of us to be able to be that voice for a child where there's a concern? So I just put that out there for everybody that from a statutory standpoint, those who are employed as members of the clergy are able to, those are the ones who need to report. But it really can be an opportunity where anybody can, and you have a very specific reporting policy as far as filling out a report, and that's wonderful, and that absolutely is what should be followed. But again, I just put that out there for just food for thought. Yes?
I'm just curious, report to whom per the statute? Per
the statute. So you're reporting in Wisconsin. We have a county-based system, so it's the Kenosha County Access Line, which is ECFS. It could also be law enforcement, so you could call the Kenosha Police Department or whatever jurisdiction you're in. So we're going to talk through what that looks like, but that's a great question. So that is who you report to there. That is a 24-hour number with someone on duty. So it's important to know the signs, which is why I spent a little bit of time just talking through if you have a concern. If you have someone who's coming to you, be approachable. Obviously, if they're coming to you, you've already crossed that hurdle, and that's hugely, hugely important. Listen and believe. That is all that you need to do, and ask minimal questions. Again, when we talk about the CAC process, we'll hit on why that can be more important. Your job as a mandated reporter or as someone who has a concern is not to do a thorough investigation. All you need is a reasonable opportunity to believe that something may have occurred. The rest, at that point, you're in very good hands with a very comprehensive team in Kenosha County that looks at these allegations very seriously. So again, you only need reasonable cause to believe. And I don't know if you wanted to talk through just your incident reporting form or if that kind of speaks for itself, if there's anything that I missed there.
I think that pretty much speaks for itself. And, what we're asking people to do is if you are a council member, a volunteer who works with children, we're asking everybody to take a good read through this policy. And we're going to ask everybody to sign like an attendance kind of thing sheet, so we can just document that you've read it, that you understand it, and that we'll review it every year.
Very good. So, making that phone call can feel really concerning and what's going to happen. So what I'd like to let people know is that the information that you are reporting, your identity is kept confidential. But I always add a caveat. There is not anything that is to say that a parent or someone else isn't going to have the ability to figure out, based on the nature of the allegations, who that reporter is. So it's just important to remember that, but again, that is not information that is shared. If it is a situation that goes to court, it isn't always something that can be guaranteed. Just want minimal information that just has the basics that rises to the level of a concern. Okay, so what happens once that call is made? The Child Advocacy Center is located in the new clinic building that opened just on Highway 50, right off the expressway in February. We've actually been part of Kenosha County since 2002, so we have been here for 17 years. The services that we provide at the Child Advocacy Center, it is a comprehensive place for members of what we call a multidisciplinary team to come together to wrap the services around a child and a caregiver, rather than a child starting at a police station and then maybe going to the emergency room and then meeting with a social worker. Everything happens at the Child Advocacy Center. So again, when you see those headlines that there might be an arrest or a conviction out there involving sexual assaults, chances are that that investigation took place by us. So again, I'm listing just a few of the multidisciplinary team members who take part. So we operate often like urgent care, so people are not calling us directly if there is a concern for abuse or neglect. They're calling that access line. So it might be that we're coming in on Monday with nobody on our schedule and we leave having seen 7 children. Because maybe a mandated reporter at school or a social worker or the emergency department has called something in and they brought those kids to the CAC. The main services that we provide are a forensic interview, advocacy services, and a medical examination. A medical examination is not something that is necessarily available at every child advocacy center. There are hundreds of them across the country. Kenosha County is, I think, really lucky to have one and has a child abuse specialist, pediatrician. That is her specialty as far as knowing the signs. So I have some pictures at the end, but the forensic interview that we do, again, we want this to be a really child-friendly setting. We want this child to come in and be able to retell the events that happened to them one time. And this is for a couple of reasons. Retelling these events can be really traumatizing. So we want them to only have to go through that process once. In addition to that, we know that kids, just by the nature of being kids, details are going to change. If you ask them, what was the weather like outside? Was it winter or summer? Well, last month was May and last month was April, it's May, we've had snow in both months. That can be fodder for a defense attorney if that ever is something that goes to court. There's nothing that makes our hearts sink more, which goes back to the minimal questions, than a parent or someone out of very good intentions comes in with a video camera and says, I asked my son or daughter or my grandchild all the questions, here you go. If they were leading questions, or if there's going to be any difference in anything that happens from that occurrence, that can become really tricky. And we know that it's very well intentioned when people do that, but just know that there's a process that's in place to be able to address those needs for that child. So we follow a very specific protocol, asking questions in a non-leading manner that are specific and age appropriate for kids. That is all video recorded and it's being observed in real time by that team of people. So there's usually someone from the district attorney's office there, someone from law enforcement, someone from Child Protective Services. So again, everybody's getting all of that information at the same time, that they're not feeling that they need to go back and re-ask lots of different times about what's happened. We're also offering advocacy services then for a caregiver. This can be very traumatizing for everybody. There might be a circumstance where domestic violence is a reality. And again, this impacts all of us. So we're providing those services and being able to follow up with mental health services and anything that's needed after that. From a medical evaluation standpoint, the exams that we do are unique. Again, we have a child abuse pediatrician who is located and based right in Kenosha. This is a specialty, just like anything else. So we get referrals a lot of times from primary care providers. Again, those sentinel injuries that we talked about or other things that might present themselves. We have special equipment and supplies. We're able to take photographs, and we're willing to go and testify in court. And a lot of times that's going to be a difference with a primary care provider or someone else. The other aspect that's important, although I think it's going to be on my next slide. So the types of exams that we do, and I'll talk through those just very briefly. From a sexual abuse standpoint, again, even though the majority of these exams are going to come back normal, there can be nothing more empowering to a child or to a parent to let them know that their bodies are okay. So that reassurance is hugely important to healing trauma. To know that even if this was something that maybe happened 6 months earlier, that everything is okay, at least from that perspective. From a physical abuse standpoint, again, we have the ability to photograph injuries and be able to provide that documentation and do it in a very timely manner. I want to touch just briefly on drug-endangered children. I think everybody's aware there's an opioid crisis that's going on, and it impacts Kenosha, it impacts Racine, it's impacting all of us. We have a very comprehensive protocol that's in place in Kenosha County. If there is a concern about an overdose or a raid or something that has happened, children are brought to us within 4 hours, and we're doing a comprehensive urine analysis. Within the last, since the beginning of the year, I think we've had 20 children test positive for some type of a substance, heroin or cocaine, just by being exposed. So it could be that tactile, it's just exposure, it could be inhaling. So just know the seriousness of what's out there and how that's impacting kids that are in the home as well. This is nothing that's confidential. These are right from the headlines that we see in the Kenosha paper as well. So just know that there is a comprehensive response, and Kenosha County from this perspective is really a leader in the state as far as really looking at what that impact is on kids as well. And then Care for Kids exams. If anybody has had the wonderful privilege to be a foster parent, I don't know if we have any foster parents in the room, we are the point of contact. Any child who comes into the foster care system or out of home care has a physical exam that takes place at the Child Advocacy Center within 2 days. These are kids that often fall through the cracks. If they're going from placement to placement, there might be medications that have expired or we need to be able to catch up on. We've had kids now that were co-located with at the Kenosha Clinic building with an undiagnosed tumor that we were able to get follow-up on a very quick basis. So those are things that are really important that we want to be sure that we're engaging in as well. I just wanted to show a few pictures too. So this is our new space. This is one of our interview rooms for younger kids. This is our interview room for older kids. So again, a little friendlier setting than going to a police department and having that aspect. So again, if you're in that situation where a child has disclosed to you, don't feel like you need to do that full investigation. I think I'm a broken record on that point, but this really, just know that the kids are in good hands. This is the observation room where our team is watching in real time on the screen. And again, that interview is video recorded, can go to court. Sometimes that is going to lead to a plea deal. Sometimes the wheels of justice don't always move very quickly. So a child who is 9 years old, let's say is 12 or 13 years old, is going to look very different. So being able to show that video in court can be really important. And again, this is a really empowering process for kids. We had one little boy in our interview room. We call this the riser room because they're able to sit on the floor and wiggle around. It's a little more comfortable. But at one point would tap on the microphone and say, "This is the important part," so that our team could hear it. And I just think that's a really important example of how impactful this can be for older kids who are sitting in that interview room. You know, there's some who'll say the weight of the world feels like it's been lifted once they've been able to just relay what those events are that have occurred to them. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Yes.
Just getting back to the reporting thing, I just want to get your sense of what, I just want to compliment the congregation for having you here, and this is all terrific. I just want to get a sense of, like, my assumption is obviously something overtly wrong, immediately call DCFS or the police and then fill out the report later. I mean, is that, I mean, are we always supposed to report, you know, on the form first and then, you know, to the pastor? I mean, what's exactly, because it's a little unclear as to like, you know, when do you fill out the report, when do we ourselves as just common congregation volunteers make the phone call, when does the council or the pastor make the phone call? I don't know if you could shed some light on this sort of like, what is like the right way to navigate that?
Yeah, so I think if you're seeing something overt, time is of the essence. I think use the mechanism and the means that you all have created, which is completely appropriate and valid. And that hesitate and don't delay, time is of the essence. I think, you know, as far as filling all of this out and reporting, if it's something that you have an immediate and urgent concern for, it sounds like there would be some people who'd be able to help navigate that quickly. If it's a situation where it's that I'm not so sure feeling, you know, that's worth a conversation. And again, I think that's why it's important to have the form and talk that through. And there are people within the community, myself included, if it is that I'm not so sure feeling, give us a call. Absolutely call. I always say err on the side of caution with reporting.
I mean, we don't have to, as a volunteer, if I'm reading the church statement correctly, we don't have to necessarily go to the pastor or church council if we see something overt. We can just pick up the phone and call the police. Is that correct?
Well, I don't want to speak to what your policy is. Me, as in the role that I have, I would say yes. As a concerned citizen, I don't know why you wouldn't,
right.
but again, to let the church know.
I think it's important that should you do something like that, you know,
Well,
definitely
absolutely.
let the council
Yeah,
know.
Lines of communication need to always be open.
Right.
Absolutely.
And in a lot of cases, when I worked in the school district, we would go, you know, to the supervisor or counselor or whatever and call to somebody else in the room, just so that, you know, you've got support. And leaving the lines of communication open, because then when, you know, you see if that shows up at your door, being out at the church or whatever, you know what's going on. People are on the same page.
Yep, absolutely. Good question, Will. Yes.
As a community person, you have the right to report concerns anytime, anywhere. If you see a child in the neighborhood who you think something is going on, you can call the police to do a welfare check. You can call this access number. There are cards all over the county. If you have concerns, not just here, but anywhere, so you don't need permission to call.
Very good.
It's actually hard to call because you doubt yourself. You don't want to be wrong, but it's better to call than not call.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Even in our role, there's times that we are calling as well, and it can be nerve-wracking. And when you have those personal relationships with members of your community, primary care providers sometimes are, I don't want to say culprits, but you know, that is a very nerve-wracking process to have to call something in like that. But from the aspect of safety and looking out for what is in a child's best interest, it really is the best thing to do, and for some of us it is mandated. Any other questions or thoughts at all? So again, just as a parting thought, act as if what you do makes a difference, because it does. Again, you all should be commended for taking these steps, and I hope that there's a sense of empowerment, at least, that this is important work that you all are doing. We have had kids who have talked about, you know, being in their Girl Scout troops or going to Sunday school classes, and sometimes that is the safest place and the safest space that they have in a week's time. And that's not necessarily the way it's going to be across the board for everybody. But as volunteers, I know sometimes we think we're in it, you know, to be able to help and make a difference. And sometimes that reward, what we learn from those kids, is just equally as important. And you know, that's really what the gift is. So just know that there are resources. There is a community out there that is very responsive to these needs right here in Kenosha County. Please feel free to take handouts. In addition to that, work that you all do, we just finished Child Abuse Prevention Month. You know, these are opportunities to raise awareness from a church standpoint. If there are other presentations that you feel are appropriate, we're happy to do those. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. There are, just other ways to be able to think about those opportunities and be supportive in a prayerful way, or lending up from a volunteer standpoint or anything else. Yeah.
So a couple of things. I want to get back to Jane's comment about our sharing of the peace in the church. And we have visitors and guests, people we've never seen before. And I wonder if there's language that we might use to affirm a parent that you don't have to just let your child go. I might assume that, but I wonder if something out of where we say, or you go with your child, because they're going to see children going off because members, feel comfortable enough to let their kids go. But I'm just thinking, wondering if we ought to say, it's not required you let your kids go share the peace or something, or go with them or something, because like that group pressure, must be okay, but the parent might be, might have some misgivings, and I guess just to affirm that, if it's uncomfortable, don't do it.
That might be something that we do at the beginning of Sunday school at our parent meeting, is just ask parents to please stay with their children during that time or walk with their children during that time. And that's probably something that would work at that point.
And again, I'm not here to necessarily give the black and white, this is what should or shouldn't do, but these are the great questions to be thinking about. And, just wanting to be inclusive and mindful of what that looks like. But, at the same time, wanting to have a safe space and, not feel like everybody coming through your door is, someone to be concerned about. So it is a fine line. But the more knowledge we have, I think the better position we're in to be able to respond to concerns that may come up. So
my other thought is, we do, vacation Bible school, all these different events, and a lot of times volunteers are few and far between. But so at the last minute, a parent might say, well, I'll stick around and help, and so I'm just thinking about that situation, and I'm wondering if, and even volunteers that have signed up and they show up and they see something, in the thousands of things that are going on, there might be that, but then, I got to go get the lemonade or something, And so I'm wondering if internally here we ought to talk about like a 10-minute, or, if you're going to volunteer at an event, you need to get there, half hour early, because part of not only your station or whatever you're going to do for the event, but in addition to that, we're going to run through just some reminder bullet points so that we lift it up higher on the cerebral level or whatever, just to be aware, but to remind each other of those things during events. Because it can catch you off guard. I guess that kind of just primes your thinking to be aware,
Yeah, the other thing about that is when you have somebody just show up and say they want to stick around and help, we know that they don't have a background check.
Right.
So at that point in time, I believe that they should not be allowed to be alone with a child. They need to be with someone who's already had a background check, be assigned to work with them.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and we practiced that already.
Yeah.
So
If there's other ways that someone is able to volunteer at the last minute, that it's not access specifically with
And I
kids,
would
it's
guess
you're able to
that
do that.
At
So.
that point, we say, you have to fill out a background check now.
yeah, absolutely.
You can stay.
Right. But
Because
here's
if they
the
don't
cheat
want
sheet
to,
you
then
need
they
to
won't
read,
come. Right.
and here's the background check you need to fill out if you want to stay. So,
Sure. And as a parent, I would say that I would have no issue with that. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts from anybody? Wonderful. Well, thank you again for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Feel free to take some-
thank you so much.